Welcome to Poirot Stories, where Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot brings captivating mysteries to life.
In the shadowed halls of Blackthorn Manor, a chilling letter, signed P, promises death by midnight. When Sir Reginald Ashby collapses, poisoned at his own dinner table, Hercule Poirot, the master detective, steps into a web of lies, secrets, and betrayal. Who wore the jasmine-scented cloak? Why did the under-butler vanish? And what dark motive, revenge, profit, or hidden love drove a killer to strike? As Poirot's little gray cells unravel a deadly merger and a burned letter's truth, one question burns. Who among the elegant guests is a murderer? Dive into this Agatha Christie-inspired mystery where every clue counts, and the shocking truth will leave you breathless. Chapter 1. The Shadow over Blackthorn Manor. The late September sun hung low over the Devon countryside, casting a golden haze across the rolling hills and the ivy-clad walls of Blackthorn Manor. The estate, a sprawling relic of Georgian splendor, stood as a monument to both grandeur and secrecy, its tall windows reflecting the fleeting light like unblinking eyes. To the casual observer, the scene was one of tranquil elegance, a perfect setting for the gathering of distinguished guests invited by Sir Reginald Ashby, the manor's reclusive master. Yet, beneath the polished veneer of courtesy and clinking teacups, a quiet unease simmered, like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. Captain Arthur Hastings, recently returned from a tiresome journey to London, stood on the gravel drive, adjusting his hat and surveying the manor with a soldier's eye. He had been invited to Blackthorn Manor at the behest of his old friend, Hercule Poirot, who had promised a weekend of interest, but had been maddeningly vague about the details. Hastings, ever susceptible to Poirot's cryptic allure, had accepted with a mix of curiosity and exasperation. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke, and, as Hastings approached the grand oak doors, he noted the meticulous order of the gardens, every hedge trimmed, every rose in obedient bloom. It was, he thought, the sort of place Poirot would approve of. Orderly, symmetrical, precise. Inside, the drawing room was a study in restrained opulence. A crystal chandelier gleamed overhead, and a fire crackled in the marble hearth, casting flickering shadows across the faces of the assembled guests. Sir Reginald Ashby, a wiry man in his late 50s with sharp eyes and a nervous habit of tugging at his cufflinks, stood at the center of the room, welcoming his guests with a smile that seemed more practiced than genuine. His wife, Lady Evelyn Ashby, a statue, was Dr. Lionel Carver, a retired physician with a penchant for florid waistcoats and an overly familiar manner. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, a widowed novelist whose sharp wit masked a calculating glint in her eye. And Mr. Victor Crane, a sleek, ambitious barrister whose polished charm seemed to conceal something less savory. Rounding out the party was Miss Eleanor Price, a timid governess employed by the Ashbys, whose nervous fidgeting with her lace handkerchief drew Hastings' attention more than once. The conversation flowed with the predictable rhythm of such gatherings, weather, politics, the latest London gossip, but Hastings sensed an undercurrent of tension. Sir Reginald's laughter was too loud, Lady Evelyn's smiles too fleeting. Clara's eyes darted toward the door whenever a servant entered, as though expecting unwelcome news. Even the clink of porcelain seemed to carry a note of foreboding. It was then that the butler, a stooped man named Hawkins, entered with a silver tray bearing a single envelope. "For you, Sir Reginald," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. The room fell silent as Sir Reginald opened the envelope, his fingers trembling slightly. He withdrew a single sheet of paper, and as he read, his face drained of color. The paper slipped from his hands, fluttering to the floor, and he clutched at his chest, gasping. "Good heavens, man, what is it?" Dr. Carver exclaimed, rising from his chair. It's monstrous," Sir Reginald stammered, his voice hoarse. "A letter. A threat. Poison." He swayed, and Lady Evelyn rushed to his side, catching him before he fell. "Reginald, what nonsense is this?" she demanded, though her voice quavered. She snatched the letter from the floor and scanned it, her lips tightening into a thin line. "This is absurd." Some cruel jest, Hastings, ever the man of action, stepped forward to retrieve the letter. The words, written in a neat, precise hand, were chillingly direct. "Sir Reginald Ashby, your sins are known. The poisoned pen has written your fate. By midnight, justice will be served. Repent, or perish." The signature was a single looping initial, P. A murmur rippled through the room. Mrs. Langley's eyes narrowed, as though filing the detail away for some future novel. Mr. Crane adjusted his tie, his expression unreadable. Miss Price let out a small, frightened gasp, clutching her handkerchief tighter. Clara rose from the pianoforte, her face ashen, and slipped from the room without a word. "Poisoned pen," Dr. Carver scoffed, though his bravado seemed forced. "Sounds like a theatrical flourish. Surely no one would take such a thing seriously." "And yet," Lady Evelyn said sharply, "my husband is clear."
O'clock. 5 hours until midnight. The weight of the deadline pressed upon him, though he knew better than to act impulsively. This, he thought, was a matter for Poirot's little gray cells. As if summoned by the thought, the door opened, and Hercule Poirot entered with his characteristic air of quiet authority. His small, immaculate figure was clad in a perfectly tailored suit, his mustache waxed to a faultless sheen. His green eyes, sharp and discerning, swept the room, taking in every detail. The fallen letter in Hastings' hand, Sir Reginald's pallor, the strained faces of the guests. "Mon ami Hastings," Poirot said, his voice smooth as polished oak. "I see I have arrived at the moment most intriguing. What is this drama that unfolds before me?" Hastings handed him the letter, summarizing the events in a low voice. Poirot read the note with the care of a scholar deciphering an ancient text, his lips pursing slightly. "The poisoned pen," he murmured almost to himself. "A phrase most evocative, n'est-ce pas? It suggests not only a threat, but a mind that delights in the theatrical. And this P, a clue or a taunt?" He turned to the room, his gaze resting on each guest in turn. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his tone calm yet commanding. "It appears we are in the presence of a puzzle. A threat has been made, and Hercule Poirot does not take such matters lightly. I propose we dine as planned, but with our eyes open. The mind behind this letter is here, among us, and it is my intention to unmask them before the clock strikes midnight." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, the firelight casting long shadows across their faces. Hastings felt a familiar thrill. The game was afoot, and Poirot was in his element. But as the butler announced dinner and the group moved toward the dining room, Hastings could not shake the feeling that Blackthorn Manor held secrets far darker than a single threatening letter. Chapter 2. The Stroke of Midnight. The dining room of Blackthorn Manor gleamed with the soft glow of candlelight, the long mahogany tables set with meticulous care. Silver cutlery glinted beside bone china plates, and a centerpiece of autumn roses lent a deceptive air of festivity. Yet as the guests took their seats, the atmosphere was anything but convivial. The threatening letter, with its ominous promise of a poisoned pen, hung over the gathering like a storm cloud, its weight felt in every forced smile and hesitant glance. Captain Hastings, seated to the right of Hercule Poirot, observed the scene with a growing sense of disquiet. His soldier's instinct had returned from her brief absence, but her expression was guarded, her fingers twisting a pearl bracelet around her wrist. Dr. Lionel Carver, ever boisterous, attempted to lighten the mood with a rambling anecdote about a patient, but his laughter rang hollow. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, the novelist, watched the others with a keen, almost predatory interest, her pen poised over a small notebook she had produced from her handbag. Mr. Victor Crane, the barrister, sipped his wine with calculated nonchalance, while Miss Eleanor Price, the governess, sat hunched, her eyes fixed on her untouched soup. Poirot, impeccable in his evening attire, seemed impervious to the unease. He sipped his consommé with delicate precision, his green eyes flickering from face to face, as though assembling a mental dossier on each guest. Hastings knew that look. Poirot was not merely dining. He was observing, cataloging, deducing. The little Belgian detective had a way of seeing through the masks people wore, and tonight, Hastings sensed, those masks were beginning to slip. The first course had just been cleared when a sharp cry shattered the silence. It came from Sir Reginald, who clutched at his throat, his face contorting in pain. His wineglass toppled, spilling crimson across the white tablecloth, and he slumped forward, gasping. The room erupted into chaos. Lady Evelyn leapt to her feet, calling for help, while Dr. Carver rushed to Sir Reginald's side, loosening his collar and checking his pulse. Clara let out a stifled sob, and Miss Price fainted, collapsing into her chair with a soft thud. Mrs. Langley's pen froze mid-scribble, her eyes wide with a mix of horror and fascination. Mr. Crane remained seated, his expression unreadable, though his knuckles whitened around his fork. "Poison!" Dr. Carver barked, his voice trembling. "This is no heart attack. His symptoms, constriction, cyanosis, suggest a rapid-acting toxin. Hawkins, fetch my bag from the hall." The butler, pale but composed, hurried from the room. Poirot, who had risen silently, approached Sir Reginald with a calm that seemed almost unnatural. He knelt beside the stricken man, his fingers brushing lightly over the spilled wineglass. "Monsieur," he said softly, "can you speak? What do you feel?" Sir Reginald's eyes, wild with panic, met Poirot's. "Burning. Throat," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "The letter. It was true." His head lolled back, and with a final, shuddering breath, he fell still. Intensity. "Madame, I assure you, Hercule Poirot does not make promises he cannot keep. But first we must act with precision. The police must be summoned, but until they arrive, this room is a scene of crime, and nothing must be touched." He turned to Hastings, his voice low. "Mon ami, ensure the door is secured. No one leaves this house until we have answers." Hastings nodded, his heart pounding as he moved to the dining room door, checking the lock and ensuring the windows were fastened. The guests, now suspects, watched one another with growing suspicion. Mrs. Langley closed her notebook with a snap,
Her lips pursed. Mr. Crane leaned back in his chair, his gaze flickering to the spilled wine glass. Clara clung to her mother, her face buried in Lady Evelyn's shoulder, while Miss Price, revived by a glass of water, whimpered softly. Poirot began his examination with the meticulous care of a watchmaker. He inspected the wine glass, noting a faint, acrid odor that lingered beneath the bouquet of the claret. He examined the table, the carafe of wine, and the plates, his gloved hands moving with deliberate precision.
"The poison," he murmured, "was administered here, at this table."
But how? The wine, perhaps, but was it only in Monsieur Ashby's glass, or in the carafe shared by all? Dr. Carver, wiping sweat from his brow, offered a hesitant theory. It could be cyanide, fast-acting, deadly in small doses. But to slip it into his glass unnoticed, in front of us all. It's unthinkable.
"Unthinkable, perhaps," Poirot replied, "but not impossible. The mind of the criminal is a labyrinth, Doctor, and Hercule Poirot is adept at navigating its twists."
He turned to the guests, his voice calm but commanding.
"Mesdames et messieurs, a man is dead, and one among you is responsible. I ask that you remain here, in this room, while I begin my inquiries. Captain Hastings, please fetch the letter from the drawing room. It may hold the key to this tragedy."
As Hastings hurried to retrieve the threatening note, his mind raced. The letter had promised justice by midnight, and the clock now read 10 minutes past the hour. The poisoned pen had struck, just as foretold. But who was P? Was it one of the guests, hiding behind a facade of civility? Or was it someone else, unseen, lurking in the shadows of Blackthorn Manor? When Hastings returned with the letter, Poirot was already questioning Hawkins, the butler, who stood rigidly by the door.
"Tell me, Monsieur Hawkins," Poirot said, "who poured the wine tonight?"
Hawkins hesitated, his eyes flickering toward Lady Evelyn.
"I did." "Most interesting. An absent servant, a poisoned carafe, a letter signed P. The pieces begin to form a pattern, but it is not yet complete."
As the clock ticked on, Hastings felt the weight of the night pressing down. Sir Reginald's lifeless form, still slumped at the table, was a grim reminder of the stakes. Poirot, undaunted, continued his quiet scrutiny, his mind already tracing the threads of a puzzle that would test even his formidable intellect. The manor, once a haven of elegance, was now a cage, and within it lurked a murderer. Chapter 3. The Little Gray Cells Awaken. The dining room of Blackthorn Manor, so recently a stage for genteel conversation, had transformed into a tableau of suspicion and dread. Sir Reginald Ashby's body remained at the head of the table, covered now with a white tablecloth hastily repurposed by Dr. Carver. The candlelight, once warm, cast eerie shadows across the faces of the guests, each of whom sat in uneasy silence, their eyes darting between one another and the small, immaculate figure of Hercule Poirot. Captain Hastings, stationed by the door as per Poirot's instruction, felt the weight of his responsibility keenly, his hand resting near the reassuring solidity of his service revolver, though he knew this was a battle of wits, not weapons. Poirot stood near the fireplace, the threatening letter in his gloved hand, his expression one of serene concentration. The note, with its cryptic promise of a poisoned pen and the single initial P, seemed to hold his attention as though it were a rare manuscript. He had dismissed the butler, Hawkins, with a polite nod, but not before extracting a precise timeline of the evening's events. The wine had been decanted at 6 o'clock, served at 8, and Sir Reginald had collapsed at 10 minutes past midnight. The under-butler, James, remained unaccounted for, his absence a nagging question mark in the unfolding drama. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "A crime has been committed, and it is no accident. The poison that claimed Sir Reginald was administered with intent, and the mind behind it is cunning. But Hercule Poirot does not believe in the perfect crime. There is always a flaw, a contradiction, a trace of the truth left behind. And I shall find it." Lady Evelyn, her face pale but composed, spoke sharply. "Monsieur Poirot, you speak of flaws and contradictions, but my husband is dead. This letter, this vile threat came true. What do you propose to do about it?" Poirot's green eyes met hers unblinking. "Madame, I propose to use my little gray cells. The letter is a clue, yes, but it is also—" Mopping his brow with a handkerchief, sputtered, "This is outrageous. Are we all suspects now? I'm a physician, not a poisoner." "Everyone is a suspect," Poirot replied calmly, "until they are not. The truth does not discriminate." Dr. Hastings, watching from his post, noted the reactions. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, the novelist, had resumed scribbling in her notebook, her pen moving with a feverish intensity that suggested she was documenting more than mere observations. Mr. Victor Crane, the barrister, leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled, his face a mask of calculated neutrality. Clara Ashby, clinging to her mother's arm, seemed on the verge of tears, while Miss Eleanor Price, the governess, stared at the floor, her hands trembling in her lap. Poirot began his inquiries with the precision of a surgeon. He turned first to Lady Evelyn. "Madame, tell me, if you please, of your husband's enemies." "A man does not receive such a letter without cause." Lady Evelyn's lips tightened. "Reginald was a businessman, Monsieur Poirot. He had competitors, rivals, but no one who would resort to this." She gestured toward the covered body, her voice catching. "He was respected, even admired." "Respected, perhaps," Poirot said softly. "But admired by all? I think not. The letter speaks of sins and justice." "What sins, madame, might Sir Reginald have committed?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Lady Evelyn's eyes flickered, but she said nothing. Poirot nodded as though her silence were itself a response, and turned to Clara. "Mademoiselle Ashby, you left the drawing-room after the letter was read. Where did you go?" Clara's head snapped up, her pale cheeks flushing. I needed air. I went to the terrace. I was only gone a moment." "A moment," Poirot repeated, his tone neutral but probing. "And did you see anyone? The under-butler, perhaps, this James who is so conveniently vanished?" "No," Clara said quickly, too quickly. "I saw no one." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign Hastings recognized as a mental note being filed away. The detective moved on, addressing Mr. Crane. "Monsieur, you are a barrister, accustomed to the law. Tell me, what do you make of this letter? A prank? Or something more?" Crane's smile was thin, calculated. "It's theatrical, certainly. The sort of thing one might find in a melodrama. But the poison suggests it's no mere prank. Someone meant to kill players upon it." He turned to Miss Price, who shrank under his gaze. "Mademoiselle, you seem distressed."
Did you know of any threat to Sir Reginald before this evening? The governess shook her head, her voice barely audible. No, sir. I only teach the Ashby children. I don't involve myself in family matters. And yet, Poirot said, you are here, among the family, at this most intimate gathering. Why? Miss Price flushed. Lady Evelyn invited me. She said it would be proper for me to join the guests tonight. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, and turned to Dr. Carver. Doctor, you recognized the symptoms of poison at once. What can you tell me of the substance used? Carver hesitated, his florid face glistening with sweat. As I said, it resembles cyanide, rapid onset, constriction of the throat, cyanosis. But without a proper analysis, I can't be certain. The wine is the likely source, but I didn't see anyone tamper with it. No, Poirot agreed. And yet, someone did. The carafe, the glass, the moment of distraction. There is a method here, and I shall uncover it. He stepped back, clasping his hands behind him. For now, mes amis, I ask that you remain in this room. Captain Hastings will ensure no one leaves. I shall examine the scene further and speak with the servants. The police will arrive soon, but until then, Hercule Poirot is in charge. As Poirot moved to inspect the carafe, Hastings caught a glimpse of the letter still in his hand. The initial P seemed to taunt them, a signature that could belong to anyone, or no one. Was it a clue, a misdirection, or a bold declaration of intent? Hastings glanced at the clock. 1 o'clock. The night was young, but the shadows of Blackthorn Manor seemed to deepen with every passing minute, and he knew that Poirot's methodical mind was already weaving a net to trap a killer. Chapter 4. The Threads of Suspicion. The air in Blackthorn Manor's dining room grew heavier as the clock ticked past 1 in the morning, its chimes a somber reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded. Sir Reginald Ashby's body, still covered by the tablecloth, lay as a silent accusation, and the guests, confined to their seats under Hercule Poirot's watchful eye, shifted uncomfortably. Captain Hastings, stationed by the door, felt the strain of the night pressing upon him, his gaze flickering between the suspects and his friend, whose calm demeanor belied the intensity of his focus. Poirot, standing near the sideboard where the wine carafe rested, was methodically examining the scene, his gloved fingers guests, his green eyes sharp as they scanned each face. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, his voice soft but commanding. A crime such as this is not the work of impulse. It is a tapestry, woven with care, and to unravel it, we must examine each thread. I shall begin with your movements this evening, before the tragedy struck. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Lady Evelyn straightened, her voice icy. Monsieur Poirot, this is intolerable. My husband lies dead, and you treat us like criminals. Surely the absent under-butler James is the one you should pursue. Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint sign of amusement. Madame, the absence of this James is indeed curious, but Hercule Poirot does not chase shadows when the truth sits before him. Let us begin with you. Where were you between 6 o'clock, when the wine was decanted, and 8, when dinner was served? Lady Evelyn's eyes narrowed, but she answered with measured calm. I was in my boudoir preparing for the evening. Clara was with me for part of that time, assisting with my attire. The servants can confirm this. Clara nodded quickly, her voice trembling. Yes, I was with Mamma until 7:30, when I went to the drawing room to practice the pianoforte. Poirot turned to Dr. Carver, whose florid face glistened under the candlelight. And you, Doctor? Your whereabouts, if you please. Carver cleared his throat, his tone defensive. I was in the library, reading. I had no interest in the wine or the preparations. I joined the others in the drawing room just before 8. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her notebook now tucked away, spoke without prompting, her voice sharp. I was in my room, writing, until the dinner bell. I saw no one, and no one saw me. A novelist's life is solitary, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, as though weighing her words. And you, Monsieur Crane? The barrister's smile was smooth, almost too polished. I took a walk in the gardens after tea, enjoying the evening air. I returned to my room to change for dinner around 7, and joined the others shortly after. Miss Eleanor Price, the governess, seemed to shrink under Poirot's scrutiny. I was with the children in the nursery until 7. Then I went to my room to prepare for dinner. I didn't touch the wine or see anything unusual. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Bon, we have a timeline. But timelines are like clocks. They can be set to mislead. Let us now consider the wine. Bitterness, almost imperceptible. Cyanide, as you suggested, Doctor, or something else. We shall see when the police analyze it. Hastings, listening intently, noted Poirot's careful phrasing. His friend was not merely questioning, he was planting seeds, testing reactions. The detective's next move was to produce the threatening letter, holding it aloft like a prop in a play. This letter, signed with a P, is our first clue. It speaks of sins and justice. Who among you knows of Sir Reginald's sins? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Lady Evelyn's lips tightened, and Clara's hands clenched in her lap. Mrs. Langley's eyes gleamed with interest, while Mr. Crane's expression remained impassive. Miss Price let out a small, involuntary whimper, drawing Poirot's attention. Mademoiselle Price, he said gently, you seem most distressed. Is there something you wish to share? The governess shook her head, her voice barely audible. No, Monsieur Poirot. I'm just frightened. This is all so dreadful. Poirot's gaze softened, but only for a moment. Fear, mademoiselle, is a natural response. But secrets, they are the currency of murder, and I suspect there are many secrets in this room. Before anyone could respond, Hawkins returned, his face ashen. Monsieur Poirot, the servants are assembled in the kitchen, but James has not returned. His belongings are gone from his room. A murmur ran through the guests. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Most interesting. An under-butler who flees on the night of a murder. And yet, I wonder, is his absence a sign of guilt or a convenient distraction? He turned back to the guests, his voice firm. I shall speak with the servants now. Captain Hastings, remain here. Observe. The eyes and the ears, mon ami. They miss nothing. As Poirot left the room, Hastings took up his post, his gaze sweeping over the suspects. Lady Evelyn whispered urgently to Clara, who nodded but kept her eyes downcast. Dr. Carver mopped his brow again, his fingers trembling. Mrs. Langley retrieved her notebook, jotting something with a secretive smile. Mr. Crane's gaze followed Poirot's departure, his expression calculating. Miss Price clutched her handkerchief, her lips moving as though in silent prayer. Hastings felt a chill,
not from the night air but from the realization that the murderer was likely among them, watching, waiting. The letters P echoed in his mind. Was it a signature, a symbol, or a red herring? Poirot's methodical approach was already uncovering threads of suspicion, but the tapestry of the crime remained incomplete. As the clocks, Captain Hastings stood vigilant by the door, his eyes scanning the guests, each of whom seemed to wear their unease like an ill-fitting garment. Sir Reginald Ashby's body, still draped beneath the tablecloth, was a grim reminder of the stakes, and the absence of the police, delayed by the winding Devon roads, left the investigation firmly in the hands of Hercule Poirot. Hastings felt the weight of his friend's trust, knowing that his role was to observe while Poirot's little gray cells worked their magic elsewhere in the manor. Poirot had been gone for nearly 20 minutes, questioning the servants in the kitchen, and the tension in the dining room had thickened. Lady Evelyn sat rigidly, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on some invisible point beyond the room. Clara Ashby beside her twisted her pearl bracelet with nervous intensity, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. Dr. Lionel Carver, his earlier bluster subdued, sipped water from a glass, his hands unsteady. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, the novelist, had abandoned her notebook, and now stared at the carafe of wine with a speculative gleam in her eye, as though plotting a scene for one of her stories. Mr. Victor Crane, the barrister, maintained his air of detached composure, though Hastings noticed his fingers drumming a subtle rhythm on the table. Miss Eleanor Price, the governess, clutched her handkerchief, her breaths shallow and uneven. The clock struck 2, its chimes reverberating through the room like a tolling bell. Hastings shifted his weight, his thoughts drifting to Poirot's earlier words. The eyes and the ears, mon ami. They missed nothing. He studied the guests more closely, noting the small details, the way Lady Evelyn's jaw tightened when Clara glanced at her, the faint sheen of sweat on Dr. Carver's brow, the way Mrs. Langley's lips curved slightly as she watched the others. Something was amiss, but Hastings, for all his loyalty, lacked Poirot's knack for seeing the pattern in the chaos. The door opened, and Poirot re-entered, his expression as serene as ever, though his eyes burned with a quiet intensity. He carried a small notebook of his own, its pages filled with meticulous notes in his precise handwriting. "Mes amis," he said, his voice cutting through the stifling atmosphere. "I have spoken with the servants, and the picture becomes clearer, yet more complex. The under-butler, James, is indeed missing, and his departure was abrupt. His room was emptied, save for one curious item, a scrap of paper with the word justice written upon it. A gasp escaped Miss Price, and all eyes turned to her. She flushed, stammering, I'm sorry. It's the same word as in the letter. Précisément, poison delivered. And by whom?" Dr. Carver cleared his throat, his voice hesitant. "As I said, Monsieur Poirot, it's likely cyanide, but to poison only Sir Reginald's glass, in front of us all, would require extraordinary sleight of hand." Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching. "Sleight of hand, oui, or perhaps a different method altogether. Tell me, doctor, you are familiar with poisons. Have you ever handled cyanide in your practice?" Carver's face reddened. Well, yes, in small quantities, for chemical analysis during my research years. But I assure you, I had no part in this. "I accuse no one," Poirot said smoothly. "But I observe. And you, Madame Langley, a writer of mysteries, have you written of poisons in your novels?" Mrs. Langley's eyes narrowed, but her tone was cool. Naturally. Poison is a staple of the genre. Cyanide, arsenic, strychnine. I've used them all in fiction. But I'm no chemist, Monsieur Poirot. My knowledge is purely literary. Poirot's gaze shifted to Mr. Crane. And you, monsieur, a barrister. You have defended clients accused of murder, no? Have you encountered a case involving poison? Crane's smile was tight. I have. But I'm not in the habit of poisoning my hosts. My expertise lies in the courtroom, not the kitchen. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet, the kitchen is where we must look next. Hawkins informs me that the wine was decanted in the cellar, but the bottle itself was selected from Sir Reginald's private stock, locked in a cabinet to which only he and Lady Evelyn had keys. Lady Evelyn's head snapped up. Are you suggesting I poisoned my own husband? That's preposterous. I suggest nothing, madame, Poirot replied. But I note that the cabinet was locked, and yet the wine was poisoned. How then did the poison enter the bottle? Clara's voice, small but sharp, broke the silence. The cabinet wasn't always locked. Papa sometimes left it open when he was choosing wines. Anyone could have tampered with it. The room stilled. Lady Evelyn's eyes flashed with something. Anger, fear, as she turned to her daughter. Clara, that's enough. You're upset, and you're not thinking clearly. Poirot's gaze softened as he looked at Clara. Mademoiselle, your observation is most valuable. The unlocked cabinet, a small detail, but significant. And you, Mademoiselle Price, did you ever see this cabinet open? The governess shook her head, her voice barely audible. No, sir, caught off guard. He hadn't noticed any unusual scent, but Poirot's senses were famously acute. The detective stepped closer to the table, his nose twitching slightly. A floral note, perhaps jasmine, mixed with something sharper. It was present when I examined the carafe, but it is not the scent of any guest here. Mrs. Langley raised an eyebrow. A woman's perfume, then? That hardly narrows it down. Perhaps, Poirot said. But it is a clue. And the Hercule Poirot does not dismiss clues. The scent was not on Sir Reginald, nor on the carafe before dinner. It appeared after the poison took effect. Someone perhaps leaned close to the carafe, or to Sir Reginald. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Clara's hand froze on her bracelet, and Miss Price's handkerchief fluttered to the floor. Poirot's words had stirred the room, planting seeds of doubt. Hastings, watching closely, saw Mr. Crane's fingers pause in their drumming. A flicker of something, calculation, crossing his face. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. For now we wait for the police, but I shall continue my inquiries. Captain Hastings, please accompany me to the cellar. The wine, the cabinet, the scent. These are the threads we must follow. As they left the dining room, Hastings felt the weight of the guests' stares. The murderer was among them, and Poirot's net was tightening. But the scent of jasmine, the missing servant, and the enigmatic P loomed large. Pieces of a puzzle that promised more revelations before the night was through. Chapter 6. The Cellar's Secrets. The narrow staircase leading to Blackthorn Manor's cellar was dimly lit, the air cool and damp with the faint mustiness of stone and oak. Hercule Poirot descended with his characteristic precision, each step deliberate, his gloved hand grazing the iron railing for balance. Captain Hastings followed, his soldier's instincts heightened by the oppressive silence of the manor's underbelly. The events of the night, Sir Reginald's sudden death, the threatening letter, the elusive scent of jasmine, had woven a web of intrigue that Hastings could feel tightening around them. Poirot, however, seemed undaunted, his green eyes gleaming with the thrill of the chase. The cellar was a cavernous space, its walls lined with racks of dusty bottles, their labels glinting faintly in the light of a single electric bulb. At the far end stood a heavy oak cabinet, its polished surface marred by a few scratches, the lock gleaming with a dull brass sheen. Poirot approached it with the reverence of a scholar examining an ancient artifact, his fingers tracing the edge. Tools, corkscrews, decanters, and a set of crystal glasses. "It's a grim place for a murder, Poirot," he said, his voice low. "Cold, isolated. Whoever tampered with the wine knew what they were doing." "Précisément, mon ami," Poirot replied, his gaze fixed on the cabinet lock. "And they knew the habits of this household. The under-butler James decanted the wine here at 6 o'clock, according to Hawkins. Yet James is gone, his room emptied, and a scrap of paper bearing the word justice left behind. A coincidence? I think not." Poirot produced a small magnifying glass from his pocket and examined the lock closely. "Regardez, Hastings. The lock shows no signs of tampering, no scratches, no forced entry. This suggests the poisoner had a key, or the cabinet was left unlocked, as Mademoiselle Clara implied." Hastings frowned, recalling Clara's nervous admission in the dining room. "She seemed awfully quick to point that out, Poirot, almost as if she wanted to shift suspicion." Poirot's mustache twitched. "A keen observation, mon ami. The young Mademoiselle Ashby is distressed, but distress can mask calculation. We shall see." He opened the cabinet, revealing rows of neatly arranged bottles, their labels meticulously aligned. One space was conspicuously empty, the slot for the claret served at dinner. Poirot turned his attention to the workbench, where a decanter sat, its crystal surface catching the light. He leaned close, his nose twitching slightly. "The scent again," he said softly. "Jasmine. Faint, but unmistakable. It lingers here, on the decanter, just as it did in the dining room." Hastings sniffed the air but detected nothing unusual. "Your nose is sharper than mine, Poirot. Could it be one of the servants? Or someone who slipped down here before dinner?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone enigmatic. "But the scent is not all. Regardez ceci." He pointed to a small, almost invisible smudge on the decanter's neck, a faint smear of what appeared to be powder, barely discernible against the crystal. "This is not dust, Hastings. It is residue. Perhaps the poison itself, carelessly applied." Hastings leaned closer, his heart quickening. "Cyanide, you think?" Dr. Carver seemed certain of it. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "The good doctor is knowledgeable, but knowledge can be a mask. We must confirm the substance with the police, but for now, this smudge is a clue. The poisoner was not as careful as they believed." He moved to the rack of bottles, examining their labels with care. The claret was from Sir Reginald. "Clara. She's hiding something, I'd wager. The way she keeps twisting that bracelet, it's like a nervous tick." Poirot nodded, filing the observation away. "The bracelet, oui. A small detail, but details are the threads of truth. And then there is the letter, signed with a P. It could be a person, Price, perhaps, or even Poirot as a taunt, but it could also be a symbol. P for poison, for penance, for something yet unknown. Before Hastings could respond, a faint sound echoed from the staircase, a soft, hurried footstep, quickly silenced. Poirot's head snapped up, his eyes sharp. "We are not alone, mon ami," he whispered. He moved swiftly to the staircase, his small frame surprisingly agile, and peered up into the darkness. "Who is there?" he called, his voice firm but calm. No answer came, but the creak of a floorboard betrayed movement above. Hastings drew his revolver, his pulse quickening, but Poirot raised a hand. "No, Hastings. A gun will not unravel this mystery. We return to the dining room. Our eavesdropper will reveal themselves in time." They ascended the stairs, Poirot's expression thoughtful. Back in the dining room, the guests remained as he had left them, though the tension had deepened. Lady Evelyn's eyes flicked to Poirot as he entered, her face unreadable. Clara's bracelet gleamed in the candlelight, her fingers still twisting it. Dr. Carver was muttering to himself, while Mrs. Langley watched Poirot with a writer's curiosity. Mr. Crane's fingers had resumed their subtle drumming, and Miss Price's handkerchief was now a crumpled ball in her lap. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the silence. "I have found a clue in the cellar, the residue on the decanter, and the scent of jasmine. Does anyone here wear such a perfume?" A chorus of denials followed, each guest shaking their head. Miss Price's voice trembled as she spoke. I don't wear perfume, Monsieur Poirot. It's not proper for a governess." Poirot's gaze lingered on her, but he said nothing. Instead, he turned to Hawkins, who stood by the door. "Monsieur Hawkins, tell me of the servants. Who among them might have access to the cellar?" The butler hesitated, his face pale. "Only James and I, sir, handle the wine. The maids and the cook stay in the kitchen or upstairs. But James, he was acting strange today, distracted. He left without permission, which isn't like him." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Strange, you say? And this jasmine scent? Do any of the female servants wear it?" Hawkins shook his head. "Not that I—" Waiting. As Poirot resumed his quiet observation of the guests, Hastings knew that the next thread they pulled might unravel the entire tapestry, or lead them deeper into the shadows. Chapter 7. The Tangled Lies. The dining room of Blackthorn Manor seemed to shrink under the weight of suspicion, the candlelight flickering as if weary of illuminating the strained faces of the guests. The clock had just chimed 3 in the morning, and the absence of the police, still delayed by the twisting Devon lanes, left the investigation firmly in Hercule Poirot's meticulous hands. Captain Hastings, stationed by the door, felt the tension coiling tighter with each passing minute, his eyes darting between the suspects, each of whom seemed to guard their secrets as fiercely as the manor guarded its shadows. Sir Reginald Ashby's covered body remained a silent accusation, and the air was thick with unspoken questions. Hercule Poirot stood near the fireplace, his small frame radiating quiet authority, his notebook tucked into his pocket. The discoveries in the cellar, the jasmine scent, the powdery residue on the decanter, the missing under-butler James, had sharpened his focus, and Hastings knew his friend was weaving a mental tapestry, connecting threads invisible to the rest of them. Poirot's green eyes swept the room, lingering on each guest as though peeling back layers of deceit. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice as precise as a metronome. "We have established that Sir Reginald was poisoned, likely by cyanide, delivered through the wine. We have a threatening letter, a missing servant, and a scent of jasmine that does not belong to any of you. But there is more. There is always more. The heart of this crime lies not only in the method, but in the motive. Who among you had reason to wish Sir Reginald dead? Lady Evelyn's face tightened, her voice sharp. Monsieur Poirot, this is the third time you've implied we're all murderers. My husband was a respected man, not some villain with enemies lurking in every corner. Poirot's mustache twitched. Respected, madame, but not universally loved. The letter speaks of sins and justice. I ask again, what sins might Sir Reginald have committed? A heavy silence followed, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Clara Ashby, her fingers still twisting her pearl bracelet, spoke in a trembling voice. Papa wasn't perfect. He could be. Harsh, especially in business. But he didn't deserve this. Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone remained probing. Harsh, mademoiselle? In what way? A business rival, perhaps, or a personal grievance? Clara hesitated, glancing at her mother, who gave a barely perceptible shake of her head. Glinting with interest. Disputes in business can breed deep resentment, Monsieur Poirot. A man like Sir Reginald, with his wealth and influence, would have stepped on toes. Perhaps one of those toes belonged to someone in this room. Mr. Victor Crane, the barrister, shot her a sharp look. That's a bold accusation, Mrs. Langley. Care to point fingers, or are you just spinning a story? Mrs. Langley smiled thinly. I observe, Mr. Crane, as any writer does. And I observed that you're remarkably calm for a man sitting in a room with a corpse. Crane's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Dr. Lionel Carver, mopping his brow, interjected, This is absurd. We're all respectable people. The poisoner is clearly that missing servant, James. He had access to the wine and he's fled. What more evidence do you need? Poirot turned to him, his expression unreadable. Evidence, doctor, is not a matter of convenience. James's absence is suspicious, oui, but it is too convenient. A true criminal does not leave such an obvious trail. Tell me, did you know Sir Reginald well? Carver flushed. Well enough. I treated him for minor ailments over the years, indigestion, the odd cold. He was a patient, not a friend. And yet, Poirot said, you were invited to this intimate gathering. Why? Carver hesitated, his eyes flickering. Sir Reginald valued my company. We shared an interest in rare books. Poirot's gaze shifted to Miss Eleanor Price, who had been silent, her handkerchief a crumpled mess in her hands. Mademoiselle Price, you are the governess, yet you dine with the family tonight. Did Sir Reginald often include you in such occasions? Miss Price's voice was barely a whisper. No, sir. This was the first time. Lady Evelyn insisted I join, said it would be appropriate. Lady Evelyn's eyes flashed. I thought it kind to include her, Monsieur Poirot. Eleanor has been with us for years, teaching our grandchildren. Is that a crime? No, madame, Poirot said. But it is curious. Everything tonight is curious. He paused, his eyes narrowing. Let us consider the letter again. The initial P. It could be a person, Price perhaps, or even a pseudonym. But it could also be a symbol. P for poison, for penance, or perhaps for profit. A gasp escaped Clara, and all eyes turned to her. She flushed, shaking her head. I didn't mean to. It's just... Profit makes sense. Papa was negotiating a big deal, a merger with the shipping company. He mentioned it last week, said it would make enemies. Hastings saw the spark in his friend's eyes. A new thread had been revealed. He turned to Hawkins, who stood by the door, his face pale but composed. Monsieur Hawkins, you mentioned James's distraction today. Did he speak of Sir Reginald or this merger? Hawkins hesitated. Not directly, sir, but he did ask about the guests, particularly Mr. Crane. Seemed curious about his profession, his connection to Sir Reginald. Crane's head snapped up. Me? I barely knew the man. We met at a legal conference last year. He invited me here to discuss a potential case, nothing more. Poirot's mustache twitched again. A case, Monsieur Crane? Or perhaps a deal? The merger perhaps required legal expertise. Crane's smile was tight. You're fishing, Monsieur Poirot. I was here for a weekend, not a conspiracy. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his voice soft but piercing. Fishing? No. I am weaving, monsieur. Weaving a net to catch a killer. And I sense that net is tightening. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over the guests. Hastings, watching closely, noticed Miss Price's hands tremble, her handkerchief falling to the floor. Mrs. Langley's eyes darted to Crane, while Clara's gaze lingered on her mother. The mention of the merger had stirred something, a ripple of unease that Poirot had clearly intended to provoke. As the clock ticked toward 3:30, Poirot announced, I shall retire to the library to review my notes. Captain Hastings, remain here. The police will arrive soon, but until then the truth is closer than our murderer believes. Hastings nodded, his mind racing. The merger, the jasmine scent, the missing servant, the letters P. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. Poirot's net was indeed tightening, but the killer was still among them, hidden in plain sight, their lies tangling like threads in a loom. Chapter 8. The Crack in the Facade. The dining room of Blackthorn Manor, bathed in the dim glow of waning candles, felt more like a crypt than a place of hospitality. The clock had just struck 4 in the morning, its chimes a mournful echo in the heavy silence. Sir Reginald Ashby's body, still shrouded beneath the tablecloth, loomed as a grim reminder of the crime that held the guests captive. Captain Hastings, standing resolute by the door, felt the weight of the long night pressing upon him, his eyes scanning the suspects for any edge. Hastings knew his friend was close to a breakthrough, for Poirot's green eyes gleamed with the certainty of a man who saw the pattern emerging from the chaos. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice cutting through the oppressive stillness. We have reached a turning point. The threads of this crime, the letter, the poison, the motives, are beginning to weave together. But there is a crack in the facade, a moment of truth that will soon reveal itself. I ask you now to consider, what did you see? What did you hear at the moment Sir Reginald fell? The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their faces etched with fatigue and suspicion. Lady Evelyn, her composure fraying, spoke first. I saw nothing unusual, Monsieur Poirot. We were dining, talking. Reginald reached for his wine, then he collapsed. It was sudden, shocking. Poirot's gaze shifted to Clara, whose fingers were now still, her pearl bracelet glinting in the candlelight. And you, mademoiselle? You were seated beside your father. Did you notice anything? A gesture, a sound, a look? Clara's eyes flickered, her voice barely above a whisper. I was looking at my plate. I heard him gasp, that's all. I didn't see anything. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign Hastings recognized as skepticism. He turned to Dr. Lionel Carver, whose florid face was slick with sweat despite the cool night. Doctor, you were quick to identify poison. Did you observe anything else? Perhaps someone near the carafe or a movement at the table? Carver shook his head, his voice unsteady. I was focused on my meal. I only noticed when Sir Reginald cried out. I tried to help, but it was too late. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her novelist's eyes sharp, leaned forward. I saw something, she said, her tone deliberate. Just before Sir Reginald collapsed, I noticed Miss Price drop her spoon. It clattered loudly, and everyone turned to look at her. It was distracting. Miss Eleanor Price gasped, her face paling. I was nervous. My hands were shaking, that's all. I didn't do anything. Poirot's gaze locked onto her, his voice gentle but probing. Nervous, mademoiselle? Or perhaps startled? Tell me, what caused your hands to shake at that precise moment? Miss Price's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling. I don't know. I was just frightened by the letter, by the whole evening. I'm not used to such gatherings. I swear I didn't do anything. The room tensed, all eyes on the governess. Mr. Victor Crane, his composure, returned to the merger Mademoiselle Clara mentioned. A business deal that made enemies. Madame Ashby, you have been reticent about your husband's affairs. Tell me, who stood to lose from this merger? Lady Evelyn's face hardened, but her voice cracked, betraying her strain. I told you, Monsieur Poirot, I know little of Reginald's business. He dealt with men in London, shipping magnates, investors. I wasn't privy to the details. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet, madam, you had a key to the wine cabinet. You were his confidant, his partner. Did he never speak of threats, of rivals who might wish him harm? Lady Evelyn hesitated, her hands clenching in her lap. There was one man, a Mr. Thornton, a competitor. Reginald mentioned he was furious about the merger, said it would ruin him. But Thornton isn't here, Monsieur Poirot. No, Poirot said softly. But his anger may have an agent. And this James, the under-butler, did he ever speak of Thornton? Or of the merger? Hawkins, standing by the door, shook his head. Not to me, sir. James kept to himself mostly. But he was different these past weeks. Secretive. Poirot nodded, his mind clearly racing. Secretive, oui. And the jasmine scent. The residue on the decanter, the letter signed P. These are not accidents. Someone in this house orchestrated this crime, and someone knows more than they admit. The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down. Then, to everyone's surprise, Miss Price let out a sob, her hands covering her face. I can't bear it, she cried, her voice breaking. I didn't want to say, but I saw something. Before dinner, in the hall, I saw James speaking to someone, a woman in a cloak. I couldn't see her face, but I smelled jasmine. The revelation struck like a thunderbolt. Lady Evelyn's eyes widened, and Clara gasped. Mrs. Langley's pen, which had reappeared, froze mid-air. Crane's fingers stopped their drumming, and Carver's face drained of color. Poirot's voice was calm, almost soothing. Merci, Mademoiselle Price. This is most illuminating. A woman in a cloak with the scent of jasmine. And where was this meeting? In the corridor near the cellar stairs, Miss Price whispered, her voice trembling. It was just after 6. I was going to the nursery, and I saw them whispering. I didn't think anything of it until now. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A woman, a scent, a secret meeting. The crack in the facade widens, mes amis. But who is this woman? And why did James flee? Hastings, watching closely, saw the guests' reactions. Lady Evelyn's clenched jaw, Clara's sudden stillness. Use no such sense. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his voice soft but commanding. Then we have a mystery within a mystery. I shall reflect on this, but know this. The truth is near, and Hercule Poirot will not rest until it is revealed. As the clock ticked toward 4:30, Hastings felt the net tightening. Miss Price's tearful confession had cracked the facade, but the killer remained hidden, their motives tangled in a web of lies. Poirot's gaze swept the room, and Hastings knew his friend was closer than ever to unraveling the truth. Chapter 8. The Crack in the Facade. The dining room of Blackthorn Manor, bathed in the dim glow of waning candles, felt more like a crypt than a place of hospitality. The clock had just struck 4 in the morning, its chimes a mournful echo in the heavy silence. Sir Reginald Ashby's body, still shrouded beneath the tablecloth, loomed as a grim reminder of the crime that held the guests captive. Captain Hastings, standing resolute by the door, felt the weight of the long night pressing upon him, his eyes scanning the suspects for any sign of weakness. The police were still delayed, their arrival hindered by the rural roads, leaving Hercule Poirot as the sole arbiter of truth in this shadowed house. Poirot had returned from the library, his small notebook clutched in one gloved hand, his expression one of quiet intensity. The revelations of the night, the jasmine scent, the powdery residue, the missing under-butler James, and Clara's mention of a contentious business merger had sharpened his focus to a razor's edge. Hastings knew his friend was close to a breakthrough, for Poirot's green eyes gleamed with the certainty of a man who saw the pattern emerging from the chaos. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice cutting through the oppressive stillness. We have reached a turning point. The threads of this crime, the letter, the poison, the motives, are beginning to weave together. But there is a crack in the facade, a moment of truth that will soon reveal itself. I ask you now to consider, what did you see, what did you hear, at the moment Sir Reginald fell? The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their faces etched with fatigue and suspicion. Lady Evelyn, her composure fraying, spoke first. I saw nothing unusual, Monsieur Poirot. We were dining, talking. Reginald reached for his wine, then he collapsed. It was sudden, shocking. Poirot's gaze shifted to Clara, whose fingers were now still, her pearl bracelet glinting in the candlelight. And you, mademoiselle? You were seated beside your father. Did you notice anything? A gesture, a sound, despite the cool night? Doctor, you were quick to identify poison. Did you observe anything else? Perhaps someone near the carafe, or a movement at the table? Carver shook his head, his voice unsteady. I was focused on my meal. I only noticed when Sir Reginald cried out. I tried to help, but it was too late. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her novelist's eyes sharp, leaned forward. I saw something, she said, her tone deliberate. Just before Sir Reginald collapsed, I noticed Miss Price drop her spoon. It clattered loudly, and everyone turned to look at her. It was distracting. Miss Eleanor Price gasped, her face paling. I was nervous. My hands were shaking, that's all. I didn't do anything." Poirot's gaze locked onto her, his voice gentle but probing. "Nervous, mademoiselle? Or perhaps startled? Tell me, what caused your hands to shake at that precise moment?" Miss Price's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling. "I don't know. I was just frightened by the letter, by the whole evening. I'm not used to such gatherings. I swear I didn't do anything." The room tensed, all eyes on the governess. Mr. Victor Crane, his composure unshaken, spoke with a hint of amusement. "A dropped spoon hardly makes a murderer, Mrs. Langley. You're reaching for drama, as always." Mrs. Langley's lips curved into a wry smile. "And you, Mr. Crane, are awfully quick to dismiss it." I wonder why Poirot raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. "Enough. The spoon, the distraction. It is a detail, and details matter. But let us return to the merger Mademoiselle Clara mentioned. A business deal that made enemies. Madame Ashby, you have been reticent about your husband's affairs. Tell me, who stood to lose from this merger?" Lady Evelyn's face hardened, but her voice cracked, betraying her strain. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot. I know little of Reginald's business. He dealt with men in London, shipping magnates, investors. I wasn't privy to the details." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, madam, you had a key to the wine cabinet. You were his confidant, his partner. Did he never speak of threats, of rivals who might wish him harm?" Lady Evelyn hesitated, her hands clenching in her lap. "There was one man, a Mr. Thornton, a competitor. Reginald mentioned he was furious about the merger, said it would ruin him. But Thornton isn't here, Monsieur Poirot. Knows more than they admit." The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down. Then, to everyone's surprise, Miss Price let out a sob, her hands covering her face. "I can't bear it," she cried, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to say, but I saw something. Before dinner, in the hall, I saw James speaking to someone. A woman, in a cloak. I couldn't see her face, but I smelled jasmine." The revelation struck like a thunderbolt. Lady Evelyn's eyes widened, and Clara gasped. Mrs. Langley's pen, which had reappeared, froze mid-air. Crane's fingers stopped their drumming, and Carver's face drained of color. Poirot's voice was calm, almost soothing. "Merci, Mademoiselle Price. This is most illuminating. A woman in a cloak, with the scent of jasmine. And where was this meeting?" "In the corridor near the cellar stairs," Miss Price whispered, her voice trembling. "It was just after 6. I was going to the nursery and I saw them whispering. I didn't think anything of it until now." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A woman, a scent, a secret meeting. The crack in the facade widens, mes amis. But who is this woman? And why did James flee?" Hastings, watching closely, saw the guests' reactions. Lady Evelyn's clenched jaw, Clara's sudden stillness, Mrs. Langley's speculative glance. The governess's confession had shifted the dynamic, exposing a new layer of intrigue. Poirot turned to Hawkins. "Monsieur, are there any female servants who might wear jasmine perfume?" Hawkins shook his head. "None, sir. The maids use no such scents." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his voice soft but commanding. "Then we have a mystery within a mystery. I shall reflect on this. But know this. The truth is near, and Hercule Poirot will not rest until it is revealed. As the clock ticked toward 4:30, Hastings felt the net tightening. Miss Price's tearful confession had cracked the facade, but the killer remained hidden, their motives tangled in a web of lies. Poirot's gaze swept the room, and Hastings knew his friend was closer than ever to unraveling the truth.
Chapter 9. The Weight of Silence. The dining room of Blackthorn Manor, now a crucible of suspicion, seemed to pulse with the weight of Miss Eleanor Price's tearful revelation. The clock had just struck 4:30, its chimes a mournful counterpoint to the flickering candles, which cast long shadows across the strained faces of the guests. Sir Reginald Ashby's shrouded form remained at the head of the table, a silent witness to the unraveling drama. Captain Hastings, stationed by the door, felt his pulse quicken, his eyes darting between the suspects as he absorbed the governess's confession about the cloaked woman and the scent of jasmine. Hercule Poirot, standing near the fireplace, his notebook now closed, exuded a calm that belied the intensity of his focus, his green eyes gleaming like polished jade. The room was thick with tension, the guests' earlier facades crumbling under Poirot's relentless probing. Lady Evelyn Ashby sat rigid, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Clara Ashby, her daughter, stared at the table, her pearl bracelet still, as if the weight of the night had finally anchored her restless fingers. Dr. Lionel Carver, his florid face slick with perspiration, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding Poirot's gaze. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, the novelist, had resumed scribbling in her notebook, though her pen moved with a hesitant, almost reluctant rhythm. Mr. Victor Crane, the barrister, maintained his polished composure, but Hastings noted a subtle tightening of his jaw. Miss Price, her face streaked with tears, clutched her crumpled handkerchief, her confession hanging in the air like a specter. Poirot's voice, when he spoke, was soft but commanding, slicing through the oppressive silence. "Mademoiselle Price, your revelation is most significant. A woman in a cloak, scented with jasmine, speaking with the missing under-butler James near the cellar stairs at 6 o'clock. This is a thread that leads us closer to the truth. But I wonder, why did you not speak of this sooner?" Miss Price's voice trembled, barely audible. I was afraid, Monsieur Poirot. I didn't think it mattered at the time. And then, when Sir Reginald died, I was too frightened to say anything. I thought no one would believe me. Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone remained firm. Fear, mademoiselle, is a powerful silencer, but the truth cannot be silenced forever. This woman, who might she be? Not a servant, according to Hawkins, for they do not wear such perfume. Outsider. Then someone within this house wore a cloak to conceal their identity. Why? To meet James in secret, to tamper with the wine, to set the stage for murder. A murmur ran through the room. Clara's head snapped up, her eyes wide. A cloak! But anyone could have worn one. It was chilly this evening. I saw a cloak in the hall earlier, hanging by the door. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign Hastings recognized as a spark of interest. Most interesting, mademoiselle. And who might have worn this cloak? Clara hesitated, her gaze flickering to her mother. I don't know. I just saw it there, after tea.
Mrs. Langley's pen paused, her voice sharp. A cloak is a convenient prop, Monsieur Poirot. In my novels, it's the sort of thing a murderer uses to slip through shadows. But it's also a distraction. The real question is James. Why did he flee? And what was he doing with this woman? Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. Oui, madame, the under-butler's absence is a puzzle. But I suspect he is not the mastermind, merely a pawn in a larger game. The word justice found in his room echoes the letter's threat. Was he coerced, complicit, or simply a scapegoat? Mr. Crane leaned forward, his tone measured. You're suggesting a conspiracy, Monsieur Poirot. That's a bold leap. James had access to the wine, and he's gone. Occam's razor suggests he's the culprit. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Occam's razor, Monsieur Crane, is a tool for the lazy mind. The simplest explanation is not always the truth. The truth is complex, layered, like the motives in this room. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the guests. Let us return to the merger. Mademoiselle Clara mentioned a rival, Mr. Thornton, who stood to lose. Monsieur Crane, as a barrister, you were invited to discuss a case with Sir Reginald. Was this case related to the merger? Crane's smile was tight, almost brittle. As I said, it was a preliminary discussion. Sir Reginald wanted legal advice on a contract, nothing more. Poirot's gaze lingered on him, then shifted to Doctor Carver. And you, Doctor, with your interest in rare books. Did Sir Reginald ever share with you documents related to his business? Perhaps a letter, a contract, something that hinted at trouble? Carver's face reddened, his voice defensive. Books, not business, Monsieur Poirot. We discussed first wine, the decanter, the residue. But they will not see what Hercule Poirot sees. The silences, the glances, the cracks in the facade. Mes amis, I ask you to remain here while I speak with the inspector. As Poirot left to meet the police, Hastings watched the guests closely. Lady Evelyn whispered something to Clara, who nodded, but kept her eyes downcast. Mrs. Langley's pen moved again, her expression unreadable. Crane's fingers resumed their subtle drumming, while Carver mopped his brow. Miss Price, still trembling, seemed on the verge of another collapse. Hastings leaned closer to Poirot as they reached the door. That cloak, Poirot, he whispered. It's a new piece of the puzzle. And Miss Price, she's terrified. But is it guilt or fear? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Fear, mon ami. But fear of what? The truth is close, Hastings. The jasmine scent. The cloak. The merger. The letters P. They are threads, and one of them will lead us to the killer. As they stepped into the hall to meet Inspector Grayson, a burly man with a weathered face, Hastings felt the weight of the night intensify. The police would bring science, but Poirot's little gray cells were already unraveling the human heart of the crime. The silence of Blackthorn Manor was breaking, and with it, the killer's carefully constructed facade. Chapter 10. The Net Tightens. The arrival of Inspector Grayson and his constables brought a new energy to Blackthorn Manor, though the oppressive weight of the night lingered. The dining room, its candles now burned low, remained a stage of suspicion, with Sir Reginald Ashby's shrouded body at its center. Captain Hastings, stationed by the door, felt a surge of relief at the police's presence, though he knew the true unraveling of the mystery rested with Hercule Poirot. The Belgian detective, his immaculate suit unrumpled despite the late hour, stood in the hall conferring with the inspector, his voice low but authoritative. The clock had just struck 5 in the morning, and the first hints of dawn bled through the manor's heavy curtains, casting a pale, ghostly light. Poirot returned to the dining room, Inspector Grayson at his side. The inspector, a stocky man with a weathered face and a no-nonsense demeanor, surveyed the guests with a critical eye. "Monsieur Poirot has briefed me," he said, his voice gruff. "We'll take statements, analyze the wine in the decanter, and search for this missing under-butler, James. But I understand you've been conducting your own inquiries, Monsieur." Renewed unease. Lady Evelyn Ashby, her composure fraying, snapped. "This is intolerable, Monsieur Poirot. My husband is dead, and you continue to accuse us while the real killer, likely that wretched James, has fled." Poirot's green eyes gleamed. "Madame, the flight of James is a thread, but not the whole tapestry. Let us revisit the facts. Sir Reginald was poisoned, likely by cyanide, through the wine. A letter signed P foretold his death. A jasmine scent lingers on the decanter, and a cloaked woman was seen with James near the cellar. And then there is the merger, a deal that made enemies, perhaps even within this room." Inspector Grayson raised an eyebrow. "A merger? What's this about?" Poirot turned to Clara Ashby, whose pale face was set with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Mademoiselle Clara mentioned a shipping merger that angered a rival, Mr. Thornton. Tell me, mademoiselle, did your father ever speak of Thornton's threats?" Clara hesitated, her fingers brushing her pearl bracelet. "Not directly, but Papa said Thornton was desperate, that he'd do anything to stop the deal. I overheard him on the telephone last week, arguing. He sounded afraid." Lady Evelyn's voice was sharp. "Clara, enough. You're speculating again. Monsieur Poirot, this Thornton is in London, not here. How could he poison the wine?" Poirot's gaze shifted to Mr. Victor Crane, the barrister, whose polished demeanor seemed to falter under scrutiny. "Monsieur Crane, you were invited to discuss a legal matter with Sir Reginald. Was it related to this merger? Perhaps a contract dispute with Thornton?" Crane's smile was tight, his fingers still. "As I've said, it was a preliminary discussion. Sir Reginald wanted advice on a contract, nothing more. I know nothing of Thornton." Poirot nodded, but his eyes betrayed his skepticism. He turned to Mrs. Beatrice Langley, whose notebook lay open, her pen poised. "Madame Langley, you observe as keenly as I. In your novels, what would you make of a cloaked woman, a scent of jasmine, and a missing servant?" Mrs. Langley's lips curved into a wry smile. "I'd say the cloaked woman is a red herring, meant to distract from the real killer. James is too obvious a suspect. Fleeing makes him look guilty, but it could be a setup. The jasmine scent, though, that's personal, intimate. It suggests someone close to the crime, not a stranger." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Most astute, madame. Mademoiselle Price, you saw this cloaked woman with James. Can you recall anything else? Her height, her voice, any detail?" Miss Price's hands trembled, her voice barely audible. "She was tall, I think. Her voice was low, but I couldn't hear the words. I only caught the scent of jasmine as I passed by. Poirot nodded, his mind clearly racing. Bon. Now, let us consider the letters P. It could be a person, Price perhaps, or a pseudonym. But it could also be a symbol, P for poison, for penance, or perhaps for profit. The merger promised wealth but also ruin for some. Who among you stood to gain from Sir Reginald's death? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Lady Evelyn's jaw tightened, and Clara's eyes darted to her mother. Crane's expression remained impassive, but Hastings noticed a flicker of unease in his eyes. Mrs. Langley's pen moved again, while Carver mopped his brow. Miss Price let out a small sob, her handkerchief pressed to her mouth. Inspector Grayson, growing impatient, interjected. Monsieur Poirot, this is all very theatrical, but we need evidence. The wine, the decanter, my men are collecting them now. If James is the killer, we'll find him. Poirot's smile was serene. Evidence, Inspector, is in the details. The jasmine scent, the residue on the decanter, the cloaked woman, these are the threads of truth. But there is one more detail I have observed. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. The bracelet, Mademoiselle Clara. You twist it constantly, yet tonight it is still. Why? Clara's hand froze, her face paling. I don't know what you mean. It's just a habit. Poirot stepped closer, his voice soft but piercing. A habit, oui. But habits change under pressure. The bracelet is a clue, mademoiselle, a signal of your state of mind. Were you nervous because you knew of the poison, or because you feared for your father? Clara's eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Lady Evelyn rose, her voice trembling with anger. Leave her alone, Monsieur Poirot. She's a child, grieving her father. Poirot's gaze softened, but he did not relent. Grief, madame, is a powerful mask, but the truth cannot hide forever. Inspector, I suggest we search the manor for this cloak. It may hold the scent of jasmine and the key to the killer's identity. As Grayson nodded and dispatched a constable, Hastings felt the net tightening. Clara's reaction, the cloaked woman, the merger's shadow. Each was a piece of the puzzle, and Poirot was close to fitting them together. The dawn was breaking. Candles had burned to stubs, their flickering flames replaced by the cold clarity of morning. Sir Reginald Ashby's shrouded body remained at the head of the table, a silent accusation, while the guests sat in strained silence, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. Captain Hastings, still stationed by the door, felt the weight of the long night, his eyes heavy but alert, watching for any crack in the suspects' facades. Hercule Poirot, his small frame unbowed by the hour, stood near the fireplace, his green eyes sharp as he prepared to tighten the net around the killer. Inspector Grayson's constables had begun their search of the manor, focusing on the cloak Miss Eleanor Price had described. A garment scented with jasmine, seen in the company of the missing under-butler, James. The inspector himself stood near Poirot, his weathered face creased with impatience, though he deferred to the detective's authority. The clock struck 6, its chimes a somber reminder of the time that had passed since Sir Reginald's death, and the guests stirred, their nerves frayed by Poirot's relentless probing. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice as precise as ever. The dawn brings clarity, and with it, the truth draws near. We have a poison, likely cyanide, delivered through the wine. A letter signed P, promising justice. A jasmine scent on the decanter, and a cloaked woman seen with James. And now, Mademoiselle Clara's bracelet. A small detail, but one that betrays a troubled mind. The net tightens, but one question remains. Who wore the cloak? Lady Evelyn Ashby, her composure now a fragile mask, spoke sharply. Monsieur Poirot, this obsession with a cloak is absurd. My husband is dead, and you chase phantoms while the real killer, James, or this Thornton, remains free. Poirot's mustache twitched, his eyes gleaming. Phantoms, madame? No. The cloak is no phantom. It is a clue, as real as the poison in the wine. And I suspect it is here, in this house, waiting to speak. Before anyone could respond, a constable entered, his face grim. In his hands was a dark woolen cloak, its folds heavy with the faint but unmistakable scent of jasmine. Found this in the attic, sir, he said to Grayson. Tucked behind a trunk, like someone meant to hide it. The room erupted in murmurs. Clara's hand flew to her bracelet, her face paling. Miss Price let out a small gasp, her handkerchief pressed to her mouth. Mrs. Beatrice Langley's pen froze, her eyes narrowing with interest. Mr. Victor Crane leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Mademoiselle, is this the cloak you saw? Miss Price nodded, her voice trembling. Yes, I think so. It was dark, like that, and the scent. It's the same. Poirot's gaze swept the room. This cloak was hidden, but not well. The murderer underestimated Hercule Poirot. Now let us consider who might have worn it. Madame Ashby, you have a key to the wine cabinet. Did you ever wear such a cloak? Lady Evelyn's eyes flashed with indignation. Never. I have no need for such theatrics. I was in my boudoir, as I told you. Poirot nodded, turning to Clara. And you, mademoiselle? You mentioned a cloak in the hall. Did you wear it, perhaps, to meet James in secret? Clara's face crumpled, her voice breaking. No, I swear I didn't. I only saw it hanging there. I was frightened, that's all. Poirot's eyes softened, but he pressed on. Frightened, oui, but of what? Of your father's enemies, or of something closer to home? Before Clara could answer, Mrs. Langley spoke, her tone sharp. The cloak could belong to anyone, Monsieur Poirot. In my novels, such a prop is often a plant meant to mislead. Perhaps James wore it himself to disguise his actions. Poirot's gaze lingered on her. A clever theory, madame, but the jasmine scent suggests a woman. And you, with your writer's imagination, have you ever used such a scent in your stories, or perhaps in life? Mrs. Langley's smile was wry. Jasmine is common enough, Monsieur Poirot. I don't wear it, but I know its allure. It's a scent that lingers, like guilt. Poirot turned to Mr. Crane. And you, monsieur, the barrister who advised Sir Reginald. Did you ever meet this Thornton, the rival who stood to lose from the merger? Crane's expression remained impassive. I told you, my dealings with Sir Reginald were minimal. I never met Thornton, and I certainly didn't wear a cloak or tamper with wine. Poirot nodded, then turned to Dr. Carver. Doctor, your knowledge of cyanide is most convenient. Did you ever notice a jasmine scent in the manor, perhaps among the servants or guests? Carver's face reddened, his voice rising. I've said it before. I'm a physician, not a murderer. I don't go sniffing perfumes. Poirot's eyes gleamed, and he turned back to the cloak, running his fingers along its hem. This cloak is a key, mes amis. It was worn to conceal, to deceive. But deception always leaves a trace. He paused, his gaze locking onto Clara. Mademoiselle, your bracelet,
It is a gift, no? From whom? Clara's hand froze, her eyes wide, trembling with fury. Enough, Monsieur Poirot. You torment my daughter while the real killer escapes. Poirot's expression remained serene. No, madame. The killer is here in this room. The cloak, the jasmine, the letters P, they point to a mind both cunning and desperate. Inspector Grace and I suggest we search the guests' rooms for any trace of jasmine or cyanide. The truth is close, and Hercule Poirot will not let it slip away. As Grayson nodded and dispatched his constables, Hastings watched the guests closely. Clara's tears, Lady Evelyn's anger, Mrs. Langley's speculative gaze, Crane's calm, Carver's agitation, Miss Price's fear, each was a piece of the puzzle. The cloak had tightened the net, but the killer's identity remained just out of reach, hidden in the shadows of Blackthorn Manor's secrets. Chapter 12. The Shadow of Motive. The pale dawn light filtering through Blackthorn Manor's dining room windows did little to dispel the oppressive atmosphere that clung to the room. The candles had guttered out, leaving only the cold glow of morning to illuminate the strained faces of the guests, who sat like statues under the weight of suspicion. Sir Reginald Ashby's shrouded body remained at the head of the table, a grim anchor to the night's tragedy. Captain Hastings, still stationed by the door, felt the exhaustion of the long vigil, but his senses were sharp, attuned to the subtle shifts in the room's dynamic. Hercule Poirot, his immaculate figure undimmed by the hour, stood near the center of the room, the jasmine-scented cloak draped over a chair beside him, a tangible clue in the unfolding mystery. Inspector Grayson's constables had begun searching the guests' rooms for traces of jasmine or cyanide, their heavy footsteps echoing through the manor's silent halls. The inspector himself stood near Poirot, his weathered face set in a frown, clearly torn between deference to the detective's reputation and impatience for concrete evidence. The clock struck 7, its chimes a weary reminder of the night's relentless march, and the guests stirred, their nerves frayed by Poirot's unyielding scrutiny. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice as precise as a scalpel. We stand on the precipice of truth. The cloak, scented with jasmine, points to a deliberate act of concealment. The letter signed P, the poison in the wine, the missing under-butler James, all are threads in a tapestry of murder. But the heart of this crime lies in motive. Why was Sir Reginald killed? The merger, the rival Thornton, the secrets of this house. Someone in this room knows the answer. Lady Evelyn Ashby, her composure now a brittle shell, spoke with barely contained fury. Monsieur Poirot, you've hounded us all night with your questions and your clues. This cloak, this perfume, it's nonsense. James's eyes gleamed, unperturbed. Torment, madame? No, I seek only the truth. And the truth is not with James, nor with Thornton, who is far away in London. The truth is here, in this room, in the motives you conceal. He turned to Clara Ashby, whose pale face was etched with anguish, her pearl bracelet glinting as her hand trembled. Mademoiselle Clara, you spoke of your father's fear, of his argument with Thornton over the merger. Did he ever mention a specific threat, a name, a letter, perhaps? Clara's eyes darted to her mother, then back to Poirot. No, not a name, but he was worried, more than usual. Last week he received a letter, not the one from tonight, but another. He burned it in the fireplace, but I saw him reading it, and he looked shaken. The room stilled, the revelation landing like a stone in a pond. Lady Evelyn's face paled, her voice sharp. Clara, you never told me this. Why are you speaking of it now? Clara's voice broke, tears spilling down her cheeks. I didn't want to worry you, Mama. Papa told me it was nothing, just business, but it wasn't, was it?
Someone hated him enough to do this. Poirot's mustache twitched, his eyes narrowing. A burned letter, mademoiselle. Most interesting. And you, Madame Ashby, did you know of this correspondence? Lady Evelyn's hands clenched, her voice icy. No, Monsieur Poirot. Reginald handled his affairs privately. If there was a letter, it was his concern, not mine. Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to Mr. Victor Crane, whose polished demeanor seemed to waver under scrutiny. Monsieur Crane, you were to advise Sir Reginald on a contract. Did this contract involve Thornton, or perhaps a rival who stood to lose from the merger? Crane's smile was thin, his fingers still. As I've said, it was a preliminary discussion. I saw no documents, no letters. Sir Reginald was vague, and I was here as a guest, not a conspirator. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet you are a barrister, accustomed to secrets and disputes. Did you sense tension in Sir Reginald? Perhaps a fear of betrayal? Crane hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing his face. He was preoccupied, but he said nothing of betrayal, only that the merger was complex. Poirot turned to Mrs. Beatrice Langley, whose notebook lay open, her pen poised. Madame Langley, you observe with a writer's eye. In your stories, what would a burned letter signify? Mrs. Langley's lips curved into a wry smile. A secret, Monsieur Poirot. Something the victim wanted to hide, even from his family. Perhaps it named his cloak, the residue on the decanter. These are not the work of a panicked under-butler. And you, with your knowledge of cyanide, did you ever procure it for your practice? Carver's eyes widened, his voice rising. I told you. I used it years ago for research, not murder. You're grasping at straws, Poirot. Poirot's gaze shifted to Miss Eleanor Price, whose tearful confession about the cloaked woman had stirred the room. Mademoiselle Price, you saw this woman with James. Did you recognize her voice, her manner, anything at all? Miss Price shook her head, her voice trembling. No, sir. It was too dark, and I was too far away. Only the scent. And the cloak. Poirot nodded, his mind clearly racing. The cloak, oui, and the scent. They are not accidents. Someone in this house wore that cloak to conceal their actions, to meet James, to poison the wine. But why? For profit, for revenge, for justice. A constable entered, his face grim, holding a small vial. Found this in the governess's room, sir, he said to Grayson. Hidden in a drawer, with a faint jasmine scent. Miss Price gasped, her face crumpling. That's not mine. I swear, I never saw it before. The room erupted in murmurs, all eyes on the governess. Lady Evelyn's face hardened, Clara's eyes widened, and Mrs. Langley's pen moved furiously. Crane's expression remained impassive, but Carver's jaw dropped, his voice shaking. You see? It's her. The governess. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. Calm yourselves. The vial is a clue, but not a conclusion. Mademoiselle Price, why would such a thing be found in your room? Miss Price sobbed, her voice breaking. I don't know. Someone must have put it there. I'm not a killer. Poirot's eyes gleamed, his voice soft but commanding. The net tightens, mes amis. The vial, the cloak, the letter, the merger. Each points to a motive, and the motive points to the murderer. Hercule Poirot is close to the truth, and no one will leave this room until it is revealed. As Grayson examined the vial, Hastings watched the guests, their reactions a kaleidoscope of fear, anger, and calculation. The burned letter, the jasmine-scented vial, Clara's tears. Each was a thread, and Poirot was weaving them into a noose. The dawn had broken, but the shadows of Blackthorn Manor's secrets were darker than ever. Chapter 13. The trap is set. The dawn light, now fully infiltrating Blackthorn Manor's dining room, cast a stark clarity over the scene, yet the air remained. Senses were sharp, attuned to the subtle currents of guilt and evasion. Hercule Poirot, his immaculate figure unyielding, stood at the center of the room. The jasmine-scented cloak and the newly discovered vial, found in Miss Eleanor Price's room, laid out like exhibits in a trial. Inspector Grayson, his weathered face set in a scowl, stood nearby, his patience wearing thin, but his deference to Poirot holding firm. The revelation of the vial, with its faint jasmine scent, had sent a shockwave through the room. Miss Price's tearful denials echoed in Hastings' ears, and he watched the guests closely, noting their reactions. Lady Evelyn's icy glare, Clara's trembling hands, Mrs. Beatrice Langley's speculative scribbling, Mr. Victor Crane's calculated calm, and Dr. Lionel Carver's nervous agitation. Poirot, his green eyes gleaming with purpose, was poised to spring a trap, and Hastings knew the moment of truth was near. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice as precise as a conductor's baton. We are at the crux of this mystery. The poison, the letter signed M, the jasmine-scented cloak, the vial found in Mademoiselle Price's room, the burned letter, the merger that made enemies. These are the threads of a tapestry woven by a cunning mind. But Hercule Poirot sees through deception. Tonight I shall set a trap to catch our killer. A murmur of unease rippled through the room. Lady Evelyn's voice was sharp, her composure fraying. A trap, Monsieur Poirot. This is a house of mourning, not a stage for your theatrics. Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. Theatrics, madame? No, this is justice. The murderer believes they have outwitted us, but they have left traces I have followed with my little gray cells. Let us review the facts. And then, mes amis, you will play your parts. He held up the cloak, its jasmine scent lingering in the air. This cloak was worn to conceal an identity, to meet the under-butler James in secret. Mademoiselle Price saw this figure near the cellar at 6 o'clock, before the wine was served. The vial, found in her room, suggests an attempt to cast suspicion on her. But is she the killer or a pawn? Miss Price sobbed, her voice breaking. I'm no killer. Someone planted that vial, I swear it. Poirot's gaze softened, but he pressed on. The letter, signed P, speaks of sins and justice. A burned letter, mentioned by Mademoiselle Clara, suggests Sir Reginald feared a threat. The merger, which angered Mr. Thornton, points to contradictions. The vial is too convenient, placed to implicate the governess. James's flight is too obvious. The killer is cleverer than that. They are here, among us, watching. He turned to the guests, his voice commanding. I propose a reconstruction. We shall reenact the moments before Sir Reginald's death. Each of you will take your place as you were at dinner. Hawkins, you will pour the wine from a new carafe, untainted, of course. I wish to see who moves, who hesitates, who betrays themselves. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Dr. Carver sputtered, his face flushed. This is absurd.
You can't expect us to play-act a murder. Poirot's tone was unyielding. I expect you to assist in uncovering the truth, Doctor. Refusal is illuminating. Reluctantly, the guests took their places at the table, mirroring their positions from the fatal dinner. Hawkins, pale but composed, fetched a fresh carafe and poured water into each glass, simulating the wine. Poirot stood by the sideboard, his eyes sharp, watching every movement. Hastings, by the door, felt his heart race. This was Poirot's trap, designed to provoke a reaction. As Hawkins poured, Poirot spoke, his voice low but piercing. At 8 o'clock, the wine was served. Sir Reginald drank, and by 10 past midnight he was dead. Mademoiselle Price, you dropped your spoon. A distraction, perhaps. Madame Langley, you noticed it. Monsieur Crane, you sat closest to the carafe. Madame Ashby, you watched your husband closely. Mademoiselle Clara, you were beside him. Dr. Carver, you identified the poison. Who among you acted? The room was silent, the tension palpable. Clara's hand trembled, her bracelet glinting as she reached for her glass. Lady Evelyn's eyes darted to her daughter, her face tightening. Mrs. Langley's pen moved, her gaze flickering to Crane. Carver's hands shook, spilling water on the tablecloth. Miss Price's breath hitched, her eyes wide with fear. Poirot stepped forward, his voice rising. The killer moved swiftly, unnoticed, to poison the wine. The jasmine scent suggests a woman, but the cloak could disguise anyone. The letters P. Is it Price? Or perhaps a deeper meaning? Profit, penance, poison. I say to you now, the killer is nervous. Clara's tears spilled over, her voice a whisper. It was Price. Eleanor Price. Miss Price let out a cry, collapsing into her chair. No, that's a lie. I never wrote to him. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. The trap is set, mes amis. The truth is close, and Hercule Poirot will not rest until it is revealed. Inspector, I suggest we question Mademoiselle Price alone. The net is tight, and the killer cannot escape. As Grayson nodded, leading the sobbing governess from the room, Hastings watched the guests. Clara's confession had shattered the silence, but the killer's identity remained elusive, hidden in the shadows of motive and deceit. Poirot's trap had worked, but the final revelation was yet to come. Chapter 14. The Unraveling. The dining room of Blackthorn Manor, bathed in the cold light of a late September dawn, seemed to hold its breath as the weight of Clara Ashby's revelations settled over the guests. The clock had just struck 9, its chimes a hollow echo in the strained silence. Sir Reginald Ashby's shrouded body remained at the head of the table, a grim reminder of the crime that had torn through the manor's facade of civility. Captain Hastings, stationed by the door, felt his heart pound, his eyes darting between the suspects as Clara's accusation, that the burned letter bore Miss Eleanor Price's signature, hung like a guillotine. Hercule Poirot, his small frame radiating quiet authority, stood at the center of the room, his green eyes blazing with the certainty of a man on the cusp of truth. Inspector Grayson had escorted the sobbing Miss Price to a private parlor for questioning, leaving the remaining guests under the watchful eyes of a constable. The atmosphere was electric with tension, each suspect's face a mask of fear,
anger, or calculation. Lady Evelyn Ashby, her composure shattered, gripped Clara's arm, her voice low and fierce. "Clara, how could you say such a thing? Accusing Eleanor without proof. It's madness." Clara, tears streaming down her face, pulled away. "I saw it, Mama. The letter Papa burned. It had her name. I didn't want to believe it, but I can't keep silent anymore." Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her novelist's eyes gleaming, scribbled furiously in her notebook, her voice sharp. "A letter signed by the governess? That's a twist even I didn't see coming. But is it true? Or is Miss Clara spinning a tale to protect someone else?" Mr. Victor Crane, his polished demeanor fraying, leaned forward, his tone icy. "Careful, Mrs. Langley. Accusations like that cut both ways. If Clara's lying," voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Silence, mes amis. The accusations, the denials, they are all part of the tapestry. But Hercule Poirot sees the pattern. The letter, the jasmine-scented cloak, the vial, the merger, the poison. These are not random. They point to a mind both cunning and desperate, a mind that sits among us." He turned to Clara, his tone gentle but probing. "Mademoiselle, you say the burned letter bore Miss Price's signature. How did you see this, and why did you not speak sooner?" Clara's voice trembled, her hands twisting her pearl bracelet. I was in Papa's study last week, bringing him tea. He was reading the letter, and I saw the signature before he threw it into the fire. I didn't think it mattered then. I thought it was just a note from Eleanor about the children. But after tonight, after the poison, I realized it might mean something." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And you told no one, not even your mother?" Clara shook her head, her voice breaking. "Papa told me it was nothing, to forget it. I trusted him. But now, I think he was protecting someone." Lady Evelyn's face paled, her voice sharp. "Protecting someone? Clara, you're speaking nonsense. Your father was a businessman, not a keeper of secrets." Poirot's gaze shifted to her, his tone deceptively mild. "And yet, madame, secrets are the currency of this crime. The merger with the shipping company, the rival Thornton, the burned letter. Sir Reginald knew something that cost him his life. And you, madame, as his wife, must know more than you admit." Lady Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Poirot turned to the group, his voice rising. "The letter signed P, the jasmine scent, the cloak, the vial in Miss Price's room. These are not accidents. They are a performance, a carefully staged drama to conceal the truth. But the truth cannot hide from Hercule Poirot." At that moment, Inspector Grayson re-entered, his face grim, Miss Price trailing behind him, her eyes red and swollen. "Monsieur Poirot," Grayson said, "Miss Price denies writing any letter to Sir Reginald. She claims she knows nothing of the vial or the cloak, but we found this in her room, tucked inside a book." He held up a small folded note, its edges charred as though it had been partially burned. Poirot took the note, his gloved hands unfolding it with care. The room held its breath as he read aloud. "Reginald, you must stop. The merger will destroy everything. Meet me tonight or I shall act. E.P." Miss Price let out a cry, collapsing into a chair. "That's not mine. I never wrote it. Someone's framing me." Mrs. Langley's pen paused,
The signature, the vial, the jasmine. She's the killer." Poirot raised a hand, his voice commanding. "Enough. The note is a clue, but not a conclusion. The handwriting, neat, precise, matches the threatening letter signed P. But is it genuine, or another layer of deception? Mademoiselle Price, why would someone frame you?" Miss Price sobbed, her voice barely audible. "I don't know. I'm just the governess. I teach the children, that's all. I cared for Sir Reginald, but I'd never harm him." Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. "Cared, mademoiselle. An interesting choice of words. Did you care for him as an employer, or something more?" The room froze, all eyes on Miss Price. Her face crumpled, and she whispered, "He was kind to me. Kinder than he should have been. But I swear, I didn't write that letter." Poirot nodded, his mind clearly racing. "The trap is set, mes amis, and the killer feels the net closing. One of you wrote this note, wore the cloak, poisoned the wine. The merger, the burned letter, the jasmine scent. They point to a motive of betrayal, not just profit or revenge. Inspector, I suggest we gather everyone in the drawing room tonight, at the hour of the murder. I shall reveal the truth, and the killer will have nowhere to hide." As Grayson nodded, dispatching a constable to prepare the drawing room, Hastings watched the guests. Clara's tears, Lady Evelyn's silence, Miss Price's collapse, Mrs. Langley's speculative gaze, Crane's icy calm, Carver's agitation. Each was a piece of the puzzle, and Poirot was close to fitting them together. The charred note had unraveled another layer, but the killer's identity remained just out of reach, lurking in the shadows of Blackthorn Manor's secrets. Chapter 15. The final reveal. The drawing room of Blackthorn Manor, bathed in the pale light of a late September morning, was a fitting stage for the climax of the night's grim drama. The clock on the mantel struck 10, its chimes resonating with a finality that matched the tension in the air. Sir Reginald Ashby's body had been removed by Inspector Grayson's constables, but his absence did little to ease the oppressive atmosphere. The guests, their faces drawn with exhaustion and dread, were gathered once more, seated in a semicircle of velvet-upholstered chairs arranged at Poirot's direction. Captain Hastings, standing near the door, felt the weight of the long night, his heart pounding with anticipation. Hercule Poirot, his small frame radiating an almost theatrical authority, stood before the fireplace. The jasmine-scented cloak and the man is dead, poisoned by cyanide in his wine. A letter signed P foretold his fate. A jasmine-scented cloak, a vial, a burned letter, a missing servant, and a contentious merger. These are the threads of a tapestry woven by a murderer among us. But Hercule Poirot's little gray cells have unraveled the pattern. And now, I shall name the killer. The room was silent, every eye fixed on Poirot. Lady Evelyn Ashby sat rigid, her hands clenched in her lap. Clara Ashby, her face pale and tear-streaked, twisted her pearl bracelet once more. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her notebook closed, watched with a novelist's hunger for the denouement. Mr. Victor Crane maintained his polished calm, though his fingers were still. Dr. Lionel Carver mopped his brow, his eyes darting nervously. Miss Eleanor Price, her face swollen from crying, clutched her handkerchief, her earlier denials echoing in the tense silence. Poirot held up the charred note, its signature, E.P., visible to all. This note, found in Mademoiselle Price's room, appears to implicate her. It speaks of stopping the merger, of acting if Sir Reginald refused. And yet, Mademoiselle Price denies writing it. The vial, the jasmine scent, the cloak, all point to her, or so it seems. But Hercule Poirot does not trust appearances. He turned to Miss Price,
his tone gentle but piercing. "Mademoiselle, you said Sir Reginald was kind to you, kinder than he should have been. What did you mean?" Miss Price's voice trembled, barely audible. He took an interest in me, gave me gifts, a book, a shawl. I thought it was kindness, but I feared it was more. I never encouraged it, I swear." Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to Clara. "Mademoiselle Clara, you saw a letter your father burned, signed by Miss Price. Why did you not speak of it sooner?" Clara's tears spilled over, her voice breaking. "I was afraid. Papa said it was nothing, but I saw how it upset him. I thought it might shame him if I spoke." Poirot's eyes gleamed. Shame, oui, a powerful motive. But let us consider the merger. Sir Reginald's deal with the shipping company threatened Mr. Thornton, a rival who faced ruin. And yet, Thornton is in London. Who then acted on his behalf, or their own? He turned to Lady Evelyn, his voice soft but unrelenting. "Madam Ashby, you have Price, nor on any servant. It was a deliberate clue, meant to mislead. The letters P is not for Price, but for another. A name, a motive, a betrayal. The killer is Madame Beatrice Langley." A gasp ripped through the room. Mrs. Langley's pen fell from her hand, her face draining of color. "This is outrageous," she cried, her voice sharp but trembling. "You have no proof." Poirot's eyes blazed. "Proof, madame? I have the proof of your mind. You are a writer of mysteries, skilled in deception. You wore the cloak to meet James, whom you coerced with promises of money or threats. You slipped cyanide into the wine, knowing Sir Reginald's habits. The vial in Miss Price's room, the charred note, you planted them to frame her, exploiting her vulnerability and Sir Reginald's inappropriate affection." Mrs. Langley's lips quivered, but she rallied. "This is fiction. Why would I kill him?" Poirot's voice was relentless. "For profit and revenge. Sir Reginald's merger threatened your late husband's shipping company, now in Thornton's hands. You were Thornton's silent partner, desperate to stop the deal. The burned letter was yours, signed P for Penelope, your true name, revealed in a contract I found in Sir Reginald's study. You wrote the threatening letter too, to create chaos, to mask your motive. The jasmine scent, your perfume, used sparingly but carelessly left on the cloak and decanter, betrays you." Mrs. Langley stood, her face contorted. "You can't prove this. It's all conjecture." Poirot held up a small bottle, produced from his pocket. "This, madame, was found in your room, hidden in your writing desk. Cyanide, scented with jasmine to match the cloak. James, your pawn, fled when he realized the truth. But he will be found." Mrs. Langley's composure collapsed, her voice a whisper. "He was going to ruin everything. My husband's legacy. My future." I had no choice. Inspector Grayson stepped forward, his voice grim. "Mrs. Beatrice Langley, you're under arrest for the murder of Sir Reginald Ashby." As the constables led her away, the room exhaled. Clara sobbed, clinging to her mother. Miss Price collapsed in relief while Crane and Carver exchanged stunned glances. Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice soft. "The little gray cells, mon ami. They never fail. Hastings nodded, awestruck. The net had closed, the truth laid bare. Blackthorn Manor's shadows had been banished,